Hi, I'm Tom Morrow. Welcome to a special edition of Living Legacies. I've tried for the past 3 years to get this next guest to sit down with me and tell his story, and we finally were successful. My guest today is Major General Raymond Murray, retired United States Marine Corps. Welcome, General, to the show.
Glad to be here.
Let's get right into it. You were born in Los Angeles, kind of grew up throughout the Southwest. Your father was in scouting?
He was in scouting in World War I. He was with the Army YMCA, but then he got into scouting a little later on.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved pretty regularly after that.
And you went to high school where?
Went to high school in Harlingen, Texas.
Harlingen, Texas. Where's that? Where is Harlingen?
It's down in the south, Rio Grande Valley.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the Marine Military Academy is located now.
Oh, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you got a scholarship to Texas A&M?
No, they didn't give scholarships in those days.
Oh, okay.
Not from A&M anyhow. They gave us a job if we played football.
Mm-hmm.
No, I went to A&M because a friend of mine that I'd worked for had gone there and urged me to go. So.
Well, Texas A&M in those days and even today is kind of a military academy, isn't it?
Very much so, although the Corps today is very small in relation to the total student population. It's about 2,000 out of about 45,000 that go to A&M, but there are only 2,500 students when I went there.
How does that compare with places like VMI? Was it as military?
It was as military in those days,
mm-hmm.
and the Corps is still as military today. It's a separate portion of the student body today.
Mm-hmm. Now you played football for Texas A&M. What position?
I played end.
What kind of schools did you play in those days?
Well, the Southwest Conference schools. They're TCU, SMU, Texas,
mm-hmm.
Baylor.
Did you play both ways in those days?
We played both ways in those days.
So you played the full game.
We all hoped to play the full game,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And most of the time I did after I finally made the team.
That's the way I remember playing football. Both ways, you didn't get to rest when the offense or the defense was on.
Mm-hmm.
You graduated from Texas A&M in what, 34?
1935.
1935.
I had to drop out a half a year because I ran out of money and anybody that would loan me any money. So
mm-hmm.
I lost a half a year and then decided I'd go an extra half year. So I'd graduate at the end of the year rather than midterm.
Now, the normal procedure for cadets was to go into the Army out of Texas A&M?
You received an Army Reserve Commission when you got out, yes.
Mm-hmm. Had you made up your mind at that time to make the military your career?
Oh, heavens, no. I was in the ROTC was divided into two portions, a basic course and an advanced course.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone had to take the basic course in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And then you chose whether you took the advanced course, and there were a limited number that could get into that. But it paid a little money,
mm-hmm.
and I needed money badly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I got into the senior ROTC course.
Well, I think you told me one time that the Army was fresh out of commissions, or they weren't granting any more commissions, and you went elsewhere looking.
No, that's not right. The Army was giving what they called, I think it was a Thomason Act. They took in 50 a year or something like that, and you were in for 2 years, and then if they liked you, they kept you. Mm-hmm. Whereas just before I graduated from A&M, I was called in to the senior military man's office, and he asked me how I'd like to be a Marine. And I said, I don't know, sir, what's a Marine? And he told me, and I said, it sounds pretty good. And so I decided to accept that. All I had to do was pass a physical exam, and I got a regular commission in the Marine Corps.
Uh-huh.
So I and some of my classmates, three of my classmates came in that year from A&M. The four of us came in that year from A&M. And then the following year, the Marine Corps began to expand in 1935. And they took in 100 honor graduates from the various ROTC and NROTC colleges.
Mm-hmm.
And there were 52 colleges from which they took 100 people, and we were some of those.
Well, this was during the height of the Great Depression, and the military at that time, the mood of the country was more or less isolationist, wasn't it? I mean, the military wasn't very big.
No, it wasn't very big. The Marine Corps was 17,000 enlisted and 1,026 officers when I came in.
So for you to be able to get a commission in the Marine Corps was something special.
Well, I don't know how special it was. You did have to be an honor graduate of your college.
With that small of a corps, you'd get to know everybody pretty fast as far as the...
Yes, after a couple of years, we either knew or knew of, I think, practically everybody in the Corps. The first 2 years that we were in the Marine Corps were probationary years. They don't have that anymore, but in those days, you were on probation for 2 years, and you could get kicked out for virtually any reason without recourse. Neither could you get married in those days for 2 years.
That's as officers?
Yes. Which saved me from a terrible fate, because I'd gone 4 years to A&M, which is a men's school, and there were very few women around, and so when I graduated and had $125 a month in my pocket, the first girl that came along looked pretty good to me. But I couldn't get married, so I was saved.
So you were saved, right?
Until I found the right girl.
Right. Now, where was your first duty station?
San Diego.
And I understand that they put you right to work on the football field?
They did. I'd told the CO that I decided I wasn't going to play football because I wanted to learn how to be a Marine officer, but he changed my mind. And I played football.
You volunteered, huh?
I volunteered and played football.
Well, in those days, the military teams were kind of like semi-pro or really good college teams.
Oh, they were better than some college teams. We beat most of the colleges around here the year I played. Not the great big ones, but some of the smaller ones. We beat San Diego State, for example. We had 2 or 3 All-Americans on the team the year I played, and I was an All-Southwest Conference. And so they had some good players.
The world was a far different place in those days. And in 1937, you find yourself in Shanghai.
In Shanghai.
Explain what happened there. Why you were there.
Well, the Japanese in 1937 invaded China, and we were sent as a brigade out to reinforce the 4th Marines that were already in Shanghai. We couldn't have beaten the Japanese army, of course, but we were there as a sort of a trigger or safety valve or something. If the Japanese attacked us, then that meant war. We stayed in the international settlement, and the war went on around us. In fact, some of my friends and I used to go down to a flour mill on the Soochow Creek, which was the boundary between the international settlement and the Chinese part of the city. We go up on the 4th floor of this place and sit there and eat peanuts and drink beer and watch the Japs and the Chinese fight across the river.
Well,
it was quite interesting.
There was various different nations, and it was all of the great powers of that time: Britain, France.
Yeah, well, there were 2. The international settlement was the biggest concession, that was extraterritoriality, where the Chinese had no control over it. The British ran it. Then there was a French concession, which was a smaller area that the French administered. And it was their territory, just like their country. And we had about 1 million refugees, Chinese refugees, come in from the outer country while the war was going on and sleeping in the streets. On one occasion, cholera broke out, and we had quite a time with that.
Were we still running the gunboats on the rivers in those days? Navy
I was there when the Panay was attacked.
How long were you in You went on to
Peking.
Well, it's now Beijing, but
Yeah,
we
well,
call it Peking in those days.
Like we called it Beiping in those days. Yes, in January of '38, I went up to on a permanent change of station. Went up there for a tour of duty, and was there until 1940 in Beiping.
And what were your duties up there?
Protect the embassy, and to provide an area for Americans that lived in the area to come in case of problems. And I happened to be the billeting officer, and I had to figure out where to put all these Americans that were living in town.
Did we have a lot of citizens over there?
Quite
at
a few.
time?
There were a lot of missionaries that lived in Peking, Beiping. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of businessmen that lived there, too.
Was it obvious to you that we were eventually going to get into that war?
Well, I'd even thought that when I was in college. That's the reason I decided to accept this commission to the Marine Corps. I figured that there was going to be another war, and if there was, we'd undoubtedly get into it, and I might as well be ahead of the game. We watched some pretty brutal warfare there between the Chinese and the Japanese. They gave no quarter. And as I say, we sat up on this flour mill and watched it. It was quite a sight.
Now, you came back to the States in 1940?
1940.
And where were you when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
It was in Iceland.
I remember reading about that. Tell us about how did you get up in Iceland?
Well, we received, when I came back from China, I went to, we came back to what was called the Marine Corps base then. I think we were there about 6 months when we got orders to move out. Well, we didn't know where we were going. They didn't tell us where we were going. So we boarded ship in San Diego and sailed, went through the Panama Canal, and headed toward Martinique. And I think that probably was our initial objective, was to go to Martinique and keep it in the hands of the French.
Which is down in the Virgin Islands
right.
area.
But when we got somewhere off Cuba, they changed course, and we went into Charleston for 3 days and loaded a bunch of cold weather clothing. They still didn't tell us where we were going, but we began to have a suspicion when we saw that cold weather clothing. Then we went on up to Iceland and joined the British that were up there. We were up there to prevent the Germans from taking over Iceland, which would have been which was a very strategic location.
Well, I don't know whether it was lost on anybody or not, but this is before the United States actually got into the war. Was this one of those kind of clandestine operations that Roosevelt had us doing?
No, it wasn't clandestine. Everybody knew about it, but we went up at the invitation of the Icelandic government.
I see.
Quote, unquote. And I suspect probably we did. They probably did request that we come up. I don't know. But anyway, we got up there in the summertime, and the sun never set, and we were there through a wintertime when the sun never rose, and it was quite an experience. We got to see quite a bit of Iceland.
It's a beautiful country.
Yeah, we drove around and didn't have to fight anybody. But Pearl Harbor occurred while we were there, and we all thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have to stay here the rest of the war now. Fortunately, we didn't have to.
Now, how long was it before they shipped you out?
10 months.
And then they shipped you back to San Diego?
Eventually, we came back to New York first on the most protected convoy I guess the world has ever seen, because I've forgotten why the ships were there, but there were 3 battleships, United States battleships, 2 or 3 cruisers, and a flock of destroyers. And our APs and AKs were sitting right in the middle of all this, so we felt pretty well protected. But we did come through a big storm that was exciting. I thought several times the ship was going to go under, but
For those people at home who are non-nautical, an AP and an AK are troop and cargo carriers.
Troop and cargo carriers.
Big
right.
cargo ships. How long was it before you found yourself in the South Pacific?
About 9 months after we got back to San Diego, we shipped out for New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in New Zealand for a fairly short time. I don't remember the exact dates. But then we went into Guadalcanal right at the tail end of the operation. We fought about 3 weeks on Guadalcanal. Not much because the Japanese were so sick they could hardly shoot.
This is in about the middle of 1942?
Let's see, it would have been the early part of 1942, yeah.
And so by that time you'd been in the Marine Corps about 5 years?
45, yeah, about 7 years, I guess.
Yeah, so what was your rank at that time?
I was a major at that point.
You moved
But
up
we
pretty...
went up, well, we all went up very fast at that time. I was a second lieutenant 3 years, a first lieutenant about a year, a captain about a year, a major about a year, and then a lieutenant colonel 9 years, and a colonel 9 years.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you got from Guadalcanal, where did you go?
We went back to New Zealand and spent a good part of a year there training.
Mm-hmm.
From New Zealand, then, we went to Tarawa.
That was one of the worst battles of the Pacific.
It was a terrible battle. We were in reserve, actually, so we didn't get in on the really nasty stuff. My battalion was landed on the next island and cleaned out the rest of the atoll. The Japs moved ahead of us to the last island where they finally either had to swim away or fight, and they fought, and we wiped them out. There weren't any of them left.
What other campaigns were you in on? I know you were at Saipan, but were you on anything before that?
No. From Tarawa, we went back to Hawaii, where we were there for about a year training, and then Saipan. I didn't last very long on Saipan. I was hit almost as soon as I got on the beach.
Now, along the way, in World War II, you collected a couple of Silver Stars and a Navy Cross.
Oh, no, I think only one Silver Star and one Navy Cross. I don't know why, but
What now? For those from that era, there was a young man in your unit that later became a well-known novelist, Leon Uris, and he wrote the book Battle Cry, which you had a little part in that book and movie.
Well, supposedly I was the battalion commander, and it was a story of our battalion.
Yeah.
I suppose he took some of my characteristics, the high pockets, for example.
Where did you get that name?
Well, I suppose the troops gave it to me. I never heard it, or he may have created it for the book.
I see.
I don't know.
So you have no idea where it came from.
I have no idea where it came from. But being tall, they may have called me high pockets. I don't know. Among themselves.
Van Heflin, the late actor Van Heflin, played the part of Lieutenant Colonel High Pockets Huxley in the movie. It
surely couldn't be based on me because he got killed.
Yeah, I remember that part of it. I thought, well, this is maybe based on a true story, but it didn't quite happen that way.
No, we could recognize everybody in the book, but he embellished all of them, of course.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you stay on Saipan until the end of the war?
Oh no, I was evacuated the first day.
Oh, that's right. You were wounded.
Mm-hmm.
Would you go back to Hawaii? Or?
Went back to Hawaii and was in the hospital there for about 2 weeks, and they didn't seem to be treating me, although I had suppurating wounds on my lower body mostly.
Shrapnel?
Altogether, shrapnel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I told the doctor I want either to go back and join my unit, or I want to go to the stateside hospital to recover so I can be with my family for a change.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, you're not going back to your unit, and I'll see what I can do about getting you out of here. So a couple of weeks later, I received orders to San Francisco, which was a normal thing for further orders.
Yeah.
And I got to San Francisco and flew one of the old Boeing flying boats, by the way. Reported to the adjutant that I wanted to go to the hospital in San Diego. And he says, you're not going to a hospital, you're going back to duty. And I said, look, and I showed him blood and stuff all over. And he said, I don't care, you got orders to go back to active duty. So I had some leave, and then I drove back to Quantico, and it hurt all the time. Just every once in a while, a real sharp pain. Well, I got back to Quantico on the x-rayed, and there was a hunk of shrapnel about the size of $1 in my back, my rear end.
Uh-huh.
And so they operated and took that out finally. And then finally, after 6 months, got the wounds to heal up. But in the meantime, I was going to the school there, and then later was an instructor in the school.
So they never sent you back to the Pacific?
No, not during the war.
Now, when the war was over, did you give any thought to getting out, or is it?
Oh, no.
By this time you were a career man.
I was a career Marine. I was a career Marine 2 weeks after I got to basic school.
Did you? Now you were married by this time.
I was married 9 days before I went to China.
Oh, is that right? Back in '37.
Right, in '37, yeah.
So your family, where was the family during World War II?
Well, they stayed in San Diego. Mm-hmm. My wife's family lived there, and they stayed in San Diego.
Okay. Now, was the Korean War started on June the 25th, 1950, and of course that was another big show for the Marine Corps. Was this something that was expected? Was this was kind of an unexpected event, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Where were you at that time?
I was in Pendleton.
Pendleton?
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take him to get you across the water for that one?
About 3 weeks. We those APAs only went at 14 knots.
But I mean, they didn't waste any time of loading you up.
No, we loaded up very quickly. I think within 10 days, I think we were sailing.
Well, when this happened, a lot of people didn't even know where Korea was.
I knew where it was, but in spite of the fact that somebody said I didn't know where it was, I knew where it was because when I'd been in Peking, I'd carried embassy mail from Peking to Tokyo, and we rode the train up through Manchuria and then down through Korea and then across and the train on into Tokyo.
In those days, that was Japanese-held territory.
Oh, yeah.
Called Chosan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now, when you landed in Korea, where did you land?
We landed at Busan. We were afraid as we came across the ocean. We got reports every day of how the battle were going. We begun to be afraid there wasn't going to be any place for us to land, but they finally held enough so that we could get in there.
By that time, had they already pushed? Had the North Koreans almost pushed the South Koreans off the peninsula, or?
Well, it was about 60 miles. So there was a perimeter of about 60 miles around Busan mm-hmm. that was still held by the South Koreans, and what Army troops they'd been able to get over there.
Mm-hmm. Had you met or had you come in contact with General MacArthur? Of course, he was the commander in chief of all Allied forces at that time. Mm-hmm. Had you ever met the man or come in contact with him?
No, not before he visited us after the Incheon landing.
Yeah, he was. No, you were. MacArthur visited the front lines. I know we have a picture of him visiting with your battalion, and that was in 1950.
Yes.
When did Inchon take place?
September the 15th, 1950.
So a lot of things happened in 1950, right up to the Chosin Reservoir campaign.
Yeah, it was
November of '50.
It was not over until till December. Actually, we didn't get back down until December.
So you went from Pusan, which is in the south part of Korea,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much all the way up to the top of Korea.
That's right.
Now the Inchon, that was kind of an in run, wasn't it?
That's right. When we first got there, we had 3 battles before we ever went to Inchon. In the first 15 days of September,
Mm-hmm.
we broke out of the perimeter and were headed for a town some distance away that we were to capture. But after we got out a ways, we got orders to return because the North Koreans had come back and filled in the gap.
By this time, the weather's getting kind of cold.
Not yet. September was very, very hot. Well, when we first got there, it was terribly hot. In fact, at one point I had about a third at least of the regiment lying along the road with heat exhaustion. But anyhow, we had these 2 battles down. Then we came back to Pusan and got ready to go to Inchon.
Mm-hmm.
And we had our last fight ended on the 6th of August. The 6th of September. And we came back and started planning for Inchon and had to board the ships on 12 September and then make the landing on 15 September.
Now you're the commander of the
5th Marine.
5th Marine Brigade?
No, 5th Marine Regiment.
Regiment, okay. And the Inchon landing was kind of a gamble on MacArthur's part, wasn't it?
Everybody but MacArthur thought so. Mm-hmm.
He was pretty sure.
Yeah.
Well, before we get into, of course, the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir, which was one where General Murray distinguished himself, we're going to take a break and have a few messages, and we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
They came from every corner of the country, from small towns and big cities. But they all shared one thing in common. They belonged to a family called Marines, a tough and determined few dedicated to protecting everything we hold sacred. And still, they come. Celebrate the 225-year history of those proud few who have earned the title Marine.
We're back on Living Legacies, talking with Major General Ray Murray, and where we left off was in Korea, 1950. Before we get into the Chosin Reservoir campaign, I know MacArthur visited you on the front lines, and then Syngman Rhee, the president of South Korea, was also up there, came up.
Well, General MacArthur visited us after the Inchon landing. We were on our way to Kimpo Airfield, mm-hmm. which was on the west side of the Han River, before we crossed the Han River. And that morning, we'd had a nice little battle. The night before, we'd stopped on a ridge line, and there was another ridge line about 200 yards away that paralleled this ridge line that we'd stopped on. And during the night, a South Korean came into the headquarters of my 2nd Battalion commander and said that early in the morning, there were going to be some tanks and many, many North Koreans come down that road. So he set a trap. He told his people not to open fire until he gave the word, and then, he had 3 tanks attached to him. And he set the tanks up at the end of this defile and camouflaged them. And the next morning, sure enough, these six North Korean tanks, and about 200 infantrymen came down the road, and he let them walk into this defile, and once they got well in, he gave the signal, and everything opened up, and they knocked out the 6 tanks and killed these 200 infantrymen in about 10 minutes, and as I recall, suffered 17 wounded themselves. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, MacArthur chose this moment to come and visit us right after this was over. As a matter of fact, one of the Army men with him accused me of setting this up for
But MacArthur would have said that was a very fortuitous time.
Yeah, but there were dead North Koreans carpeting that place, and these tanks all smoking, burning.
Mm-hmm. Of course, MacArthur brought a photographer with him too, didn't he?
Oh yeah, well, photographer was there with him, and
Life magazine.
Life magazine, and I can't remember which one it was, well-known one, and he took that picture that is on the screen, or was on the screen.
Yeah.
And so then when we Syngman Rhee was when we got back from the reservoir, so we can cover that later if you'd like.
Okay, sure. The Choson Reservoir is right near the border of North Korea and China, which is the Yalu River, if I remember my geography.
Well, it's actually Manchuria, but of course, well, anyway.
Well, it was Manchuria then. Do they even recognize Manchuria today? Is it? I mean, it's a Chinese province?
I think it's all Chinese today.
Yeah.
But it was at that time, I think, Manchuria. It's not real close. It's quite a few miles from the border, but it's way up in North Korea. Mm-hmm. And what was your question?
Well, I was. Did you have any inkling that the Chinese were going to attack? Because MacArthur kept saying that they won't attack.
That's right. Not initially, we didn't. But we did have problems with this narrow road. It was a one-way road, except occasionally you could bypass. Constantly climbing up these mountains that I don't know exactly how tall they were, but they were quite tall mountains. And it was getting colder all the time. And the 7th Marines was leading the way, and they began to run into Chinese. And they had some skirmishes with them. But after a battle, the Chinese would withdraw. So we kept advancing. We were following the 7th Marines. And when we got to the reservoir, we wound up with the 5th and the 7th Marines at a town called Udamni on the west side of the reservoir. And we were to attack to the west from that point. The 7th Marines had been leading all this time, and then I was to pass through the 7th Marines and continue out this road. Just as the day that we began our attack, I think it was the 27th of November, the Chinese attacked in force. And
that was about 120,000 troops?
At least that, yes. Not all of them at once, but...
it seemed like it probably.
Well, yes, it was pretty rough. And we had, the 5th and 7th Marines had sort of interspersed to set up a defensive position before we began our move out. So when we realized that we were surrounded by Chinese, considerable number of Chinese, Colonel Litzenberg, who had the 7th Marines, and I got together and we formed a joint operation order to use both of our regiments in conjunction with each other.
How many men would a regiment did you have under you at that time?
About 3,500.
So the total is about 7,000.
Around 7,000, I guess. Yeah. So, well, we were reinforced a little bit. We had some No, the tanks never did get up there.
But the Army was there also, weren't they?
Not where we were. The Army was on the other side of the reservoir.
Okay.
And we stayed in position for about 3 days and fighting off these attacks, which came every night.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had orders to withdraw. So,
did they seem to, the attacks were at night only, or were they doing any fighting in the daytime?
there was some fighting in the daytime, but the Chinese mostly attacked at night. They knew that during the day we had the advantage because we had much heavier armament than they did. They didn't have any heavy artillery. We did have some pretty good artillery support. And we started back, I think it was the 1st of December. The dates I've lost, but about that time. And they fought us all the way back to the little town at the bottom of the reservoir, which is named Hagaruri, where another unit of the division was not quite a regiment in size, mostly headquarters people, because they were moving the division headquarters up there. And we joined that group then and fought defensive battles again then for 2 days, I think it was. And then the next day we started towards Kotori, which was 11 miles down a valley, and had some very heavy battles along there too. And it was snowing off and on all during this time too, and about 20 below zero. And
it's pretty hard to get equipment to work properly.
Terrible. It was, yes, it was. And then for 2 or 3 days we didn't have any air support, and that made it more difficult. But then it cleared up, and finally the air came in, and that really did the job for us. They really clobbered those people. Mm-hmm. And we'd see groups of them running off up through the snow up a hill, and everybody would turn loose on them.
I understand a lot of them froze to death.
They did, and I saw some of them walk around with frostbitten feet that had huge blisters that looked like a stump, and they acted like it didn't hurt them or anything. I the most stoic people I ever saw in my life.
Yeah.
But it was a very, very difficult battle, and the only way we got out of there was that the bravest men I've ever known were fighting to get out.
Well, I know a lot of the troops that served under you credit you a good deal for their safety and getting them out.
Well, I always felt that they're the ones who got me out. Well, I think maybe I was making some statements now and then that was sort of designed to lift their spirits a little bit, maybe.
I think they put it a little bit more bluntly than that, but they said it worked. You had some choice words, and they got, everybody was motivated, shall we say.
Well, anyway.
Well, it's probably, the bottom line was we had about 20,000 troops, both the Army and Marine Corps, surrounded, and they were able to escape. It was kind of a retreat.
Well,
it wasn't not a one battle, but the fact that you survived is probably one of the greatest victories in American history.
Oh, I think probably so, but I prefer to call it what General Smith called it, attack in another direction.
Yeah. Was that General O.D. Smith?
O.P. Smith, yes.
Yeah. We're just attacking in another direction.
That's right. And Chesty Puller is alleged to have said that now that we're surrounded, we've got them where we want them.
What kind of guy was he? Did you know him very well?
I didn't know him very well. I'd never seen him before out there. I flew to his headquarters one day when we were attacking Seoul, and that's the first time I ever met him. I flew over to coordinate. He had the 1st Marines, and I flew over we were to coordinate an attack on Seoul. But we'll say that if war can be fun, that was fun at least for a regimental commander, because you could always get in a position from where you could see an observation post, from where you could see the whole regiment out in front of you and run it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting. We did some. We were called the Fire Brigade in the perimeter in the early days, because we were dashing back and forth to plug holes in the line, and driving. Our regiment was driving a division at a time back across the river. Then we made our standard amphibious landing. Then we crossed the river. Then we fought in the big built-up city. Then we fought in snow, extreme cold, and mountainous weather. We covered the gamut.
We had a lot of frostbite casualties.
A lot of frostbite casualties. A great many of which could have been prevented if kids had done what they should have done. But you reach a point, and I reached it myself, where you just plain don't give a darn what happens. They can shoot at you, and you just shake your fist at them and say.
What was the equipment like in the Korean War in those early days? Were we properly equipped?
We weren't equipped for the cold weather very well. We were equipped, and it did, but not like the equipment that they later got.
It was something that was totally unexpected.
Yeah, and I think a lot of I'm not sure about this, but I think some of the stuff was, cold weather stuff was bought from places like Sears Roebuck.
Is that right?
I think so. I'm not positive.
Yeah. Now this is after the Chosun campaign was over with. Is that when President Syngman Rhee came?
Yes, we came back to the place where we'd started out from 6 weeks earlier.
And he was a controversial character, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, he was I think a dictator who had had his country in his heart. He wanted to do good for Korea, but he was, I think, a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, apparently later on, some people got to him too. That some of these subordinate other Koreans got to him that convinced him to do things that weren't all that great.
Mm.
But anyhow, we'd gone back to the same place where we'd started out, as I say, 6 weeks earlier, and Syngman Rhee came to visit, and I had a platoon of national police attached to the regiment, and they performed headquarters security for me. And I thought it might be nice if Syngman Rhee talked to them, so I had him lined up, and he agreed to talk to them. So he spoke to him in Korean, so I have no idea what he said, but they all seemed to appreciate it.
Now, how long were you in Korea?
We got there the 1st of August, 1950, and I came home in March of 51. So
you didn't have to go back because
No,
that war went on until 1953.
Yeah, I don't know whether anybody had to go back. Maybe some did.
Yeah.
Not like Vietnam, where people were.
Well, let's jump ahead. You received your first star, Brigadier General, in 1959.
1959.
Yeah. What were your duties then?
I had been the chief of staff of the base at Camp Lejeune, and got promoted while I was just before I left there, and then I went from there. After my promotion, I went out to Okinawa as the assistant division commander.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were in Okinawa when I was in the Navy, flying in and out of there from Guam.
Oh.
We used to fly into Naha Naval Air Facility there. So, you were? We've also got another picture of you here with you and Chiang Kai-shek visiting the troops in Taiwan.
Yes, we made a landing. The division on Okinawa made a landing on Taiwan in conjunction with the Chinese Marine Corps. And while we were out there, while we were on that exercise, he came to visit, and we put on a demonstration for him.
In that same year, you went back to Korea to be honored by the city of Seoul and the Republic of Korea.
Well, I went back on a planning trip to Seoul, and while I was there,
This is in 1959.
1959, while I was there, I was surprised that they had a review parade for me, and at that parade they presented me with this Uchi medal.
Now that's one of Korea's highest decorations?
That's their second highest decoration, yeah. And then later on, they took me to meet the mayor of the city, and he presented me with the key to the city, which I have on my mantle.
Things
So I can get back there anytime I want to.
things have changed. By that time, and during those 9 years, things had changed dramatically.
Oh, goodness,
Korea.
I should say. And then in 1975, my wife and I went back to Korea on a visit, and I was going to show her one of my CPs on the outskirts of Seoul. Couldn't find it. Nothing but high-rise buildings all over the place.
Now you were in Camp Pendleton, 1960-62. You were the assistant base commander.
I was initially assistant base commander. While I was on Okinawa, my wife became ill, and I came home, and she died shortly after I got home. Then I went back to Okinawa, and the commandant asked me where I'd like to go, and I said I'd like to go somewhere where there are stewards, because I had 4 young kids, and I wanted to have them with me. And so he assigned me to Pendleton, where I could have the stewards to run the house, so I could take care of the kids. And then a little later on, the base commander was ordered out to Hawaii, and I became the base commander then.
Now, when did you get involved in Vietnam?
In 1967.
Tell us what that was like in 1967. And we weren't all that engaged, were we? By that time, or was
Oh
it?
yes, we were thoroughly engaged by that time. My job was deputy corps commander, but our headquarters in Da Nang.
Mm-hmm. Were you a
I was a major general. I was a major general.
You got your second star then by that time.
Yeah. And we were we had 2 divisions and then a wing out there, which was our corps, and they were engaged all the time.
Did you work with Westmoreland, General Westmoreland, the Army?
I didn't have much to do with Westmoreland. No, the corps commander, General Cushman, was the one that dealt with him.
Mm-hmm.
No, I sort of supervised what they called the PACs. I've forgotten what that stood for, but it was a Marine squad that joined up with a platoon of sort of what you might call militia in a village, and these Marines trained these South Koreans for the protection of the villages.
South Vietnamese
Right. Villages, yeah. I supervised that, and that was my main job.
After Vietnam, where did you go?
I came back to Washington and retired.
So, I thought you were at Pendleton when you retired. You retired out of the Pentagon?
Well, out of headquarters, Marine Corps, which not in the Pentagon at that time. It is now, but it wasn't then.
What did you do there? What was your job there?
Well, I didn't have any job. I just went back and then retired.
Well, we're about out of time, and I know that you've got a long list of civic activities. You and your second wife, Helen, who unfortunately passed away not too long ago, were involved in many civic activities. Her with the Tri-City Hospital Foundation. She was one of the founders and movers and shakers in that for years. And you were president of the Oceanside Rotary Club, and I think we have a picture of you and your father in that.
Well, I don't know whether you can find him or not. He's he's the one with the goatee, though.
I see. Okay. And
yeah, he was a great Rotarian. He'd been in it for over 50 years.
what are you doing these days?
Mostly playing golf and trying to get rid of stuff in the house, getting ready. I'm planning on moving into La Costa Glen when they finally build it. And I'm trying to get ready for that.
Uh-huh. What are your thoughts on the Chinese situation that's going on over there? You know, you've had so much of your career has been in that area, starting in Shanghai right through to the end. What do you think's going to happen over there?
Oh, well, I don't think anybody knows for sure what's going to happen. I think eventually we're going to get the plane back, but
maybe in pieces.
I don't think China wants a war any more than we do, and I think when push comes to shove, why they'll accommodate in some way, and we'll probably accommodate in some way that they can save face, because that's terribly important to them.
It's all war has always had to do with land grabbing and economics, but right now, you know, with the amount of money that the United States spends in buying goods from China, and I think you're right about China not wanting war. Was it any different back in when the Japanese were trying to take over all of Asia?
Oh, good heavens, yes. The Chinese were, their economy was mostly just local economy. It was Peking, or Beiping as we called it, was the old city with all of its walls, and
it was a world unto itself.
Yes, and there were an awful lot of coolies,
Mm-hmm.
people that just and they had rickshaw boys that pulled rickshaws. In fact, while there, I had a private rickshaw for my wife. We lived it up in China.
It was a different world.
It was a totally different world. It was the last of the colonial days when we were out there.
Well, General Murray, we've run out of time, but your fabulous career has covered such a great expanse of 20th century history, and I can't tell you enough of how much I appreciate you coming in and sharing it with us.
No, I'm glad to do it.
I'm Tom Morrow. I hope you've enjoyed this special edition of Living Legacies here on KOCT. Join us next time. This program is made possible through the generous underwriting grants of Hatter Williams and Purdy Insurance Services of Oceanside, providing North County with complete insurance needs for more than half a century. The TriQuest Corporation, providing quality office and manufacturing space in Oceanside. And the North County Times, serving all of North County with complete local daily news coverage and internet services.